Hey guys, tonight we're taking a journey back in time to the land between two great rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, the cradle of civilization, where the first beer was brewed. Yep, you heard that right, the ancient Mesopotamians were the masterminds behind one of the oldest and most beloved beverages, beer. But it wasn't just about getting a little buzzed after a long day, it was deeply embedded in their culture, religion, and social life. Imagine walking through the bustling streets of Ur or Babylon, the air thick with the scents of barley, wheat, and something much more intoxicating, beer being brewed in large vats, consumed by both kings and commoners alike. It was the drink that brought people together and helped the ancient world wind down from their daily struggles. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, feel free to post your location and local time, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Beer was not just a drink for the Mesopotamians, it was a sacred part of life. Brewed in large quantities and consumed daily, beer wasn't simply about having a drink with your meal, it was about connection. Connection to the gods, connection to each other, and connection to the land. In a world without refrigerators or modern conveniences, beer provided a nutritious, easily accessible form of sustenance. But more than that, it played a role in rituals, celebrations, and social gatherings, offering a glimpse into the way the ancient Mesopotamians balanced work, leisure, and divine favor. Tonight, we'll explore how they brewed their beer, why it was so important, and how it laid the groundwork for the drinking culture we enjoy today. In ancient Mesopotamia, beer wasn't just a drink, it was a cornerstone of daily life, deeply interwoven with both the social and religious fabric of the civilization. Picture yourself in the bustling markets of Babylon or Sumer, where you could see people from all walks of life, farmers, merchants, kings, and priests, gathering at local taverns to enjoy a refreshing mug of beer. For the ancient Mesopotamians, beer was much more than a simple beverage. It was a vital part of their sustenance, their culture, and their spiritual practices. It wasn't just a drink to quench your thirst, it was a symbol of the interconnectedness of life, labor, and divine favor. Beer was, in fact, so important that the Mesopotamians had a goddess of beer, Ninkasi. She was revered as the patroness of brewing, and hymns were even written to honor her and her role in the brewing process. These hymns weren't just religious, they were practical, serving as recipes for brewing beer. The ancient Mesopotamians didn't have the modern recipe books we take for granted today, so they wrote their brewing instructions in the form of songs and prayers, ensuring that the sacred art of brewing was passed down through the generations. Historians debate the exact role of beer in Mesopotamian society, particularly in relation to its religious significance. Some scholars suggest that beer was a gift from the gods, something that brought people closer to the divine. Others argue that it was simply a practical solution to the challenges of ancient life, offering a safe and nutritious alternative to drinking water, which could often be contaminated. Regardless of the interpretation, beer was certainly more than just a recreational beverage. It was a symbol of the Mesopotamians' connection to the earth and the gods, a divine gift that provided sustenance and spiritual nourishment. But it wasn't just the elite who drank beer. Beer was consumed by everyone, from the laborers who worked long hours in the fields to the merchants who traded goods across vast distances. In fact, beer was often a part of the daily diet for the common people. For the working class, beer provided not just refreshment but also nutrients, especially for those who couldn't afford wine or other expensive beverages. The lower alcohol content of Mesopotamian beer made it a more accessible option for regular consumption, offering a calming effect after a long day's work without causing inebriation. It wasn't just about nutrition, either. Beer played a central role in socialization. Whether at a local tavern or in the company of friends and family, sharing a drink was a way for people to bond and build relationships. Beer was served in communal settings, allowing people to come together, share stories, and unwind. The social aspect of drinking beer in Mesopotamian culture was just as important as the health benefits it provided. As we relax and unwind today, sipping a cold drink with friends or colleagues, we can trace the roots of that tradition back to these ancient gatherings in Mesopotamia. As you prepare to rest tonight, think of the ancient Mesopotamians, gathering around, enjoying their beer, creating bonds, and celebrating life. Beer wasn't just about relieving thirst, it was about connecting with others and with the divine. In the quiet of your own space tonight, think of how something as simple as a drink can carry such profound meaning. Whether we are sharing a drink with a friend or alone in contemplation, the act of drinking, much like the Mesopotamians did thousands of years ago, is part of the broader human experience of connection and relaxation. Now that we've established the importance of beer in ancient Mesopotamian society, let's take a closer look at the brewing process itself, a practice that was not only essential for daily life but also a sacred art. Brewing beer in Mesopotamia wasn't just a skill, it was a revered craft, often passed down through generations, sometimes even overseen by priests or priestesses who served as guardians of the brewing process. In a world without modern brewing equipment, the Mesopotamians had to rely on natural methods and ingredients to create their beloved beverage. And just like today, brewing beer in ancient Mesopotamia was both an art and a science. Brewing beer in Mesopotamia was a multi-step process that required both patience and knowledge of ingredients. The primary ingredients in ancient Mesopotamian beer were barley and water, though they often added dates and other fruits to enhance flavor and sweetness. The process started with soaking the barley in water, then allowing it to germinate to convert the starches into fermentable sugars. After the barley had sprouted, it was roasted to halt the germination process, and the resulting malt was mixed with water, creating a thick, porridge-like substance. This mixture was then fermented with wild yeast that naturally occurred in the environment, a process that allowed the liquid to ferment into a rudimentary form of beer. The beer created in ancient Mesopotamia was often thick and cloudy, far different from the clear, carbonated beers we drink today. It had a higher nutritional value, functioning as both food and drink, offering sustenance to those who consumed it. The thick consistency of the beer, sometimes described as more of a porridge than a liquid, was a common feature of ancient brewing methods. As you imagine sipping this beer, think of it as more than just a beverage. It was a vital part of the Mesopotamian diet, often consumed with meals and in large quantities to provide both hydration and nutrition. This version of beer was meant to be enjoyed slowly, providing energy and nourishment for long hours of labor. Beer brewing, however, was more than just a utilitarian practice, it was also a ritual. Brewing beer in ancient Mesopotamia was tied to the gods and divine favor. As previously mentioned, the goddess Ninkasi was the patroness of beer, and many brewing rituals involved offerings to her. In fact, some of the oldest surviving texts on beer brewing are hymns written in her honor. These hymns not only praised the goddess but also doubled as instructions for brewing beer, written in poetic form so that the process could be passed down from one generation to the next. It's incredible to think that the practice of brewing beer was both sacred and practical, with each batch of beer created in reverence to the divine. Historians still argue about how much of the beer brewing process was influenced by religious practices and how much was simply a result of practical necessity. Some scholars believe that the brewing process was so deeply intertwined with religion that beer itself was seen as a sacred beverage, necessary to maintain harmony with the gods. Others argue that brewing beer was more of a practical solution to the challenges of ancient life, with the sacred elements of beer brewing becoming symbolic over time. Regardless of where the truth lies, what's clear is that the brewing of beer was considered an important task, one that involved not just technical knowledge, but also cultural reverence. As you settle in tonight, think about the ancient craft of beer brewing, how, for the Mesopotamians, it wasn't just a way to make a drink, but a ritual that connected them to their gods and their communities. It wasn't just about flavor or function, it was about reverence, tradition, and the careful art of balancing ingredients to create something both nutritious and divine. Like the Mesopotamians, we too engage in rituals, whether in making our favorite drinks, preparing meals, or caring for ourselves and those around us. And in those rituals, we can find connection, comfort, and a sense of balance, just as the ancient brewers of Mesopotamia did thousands of years ago. As we continue our exploration of the brewing process in ancient Mesopotamia, it's time to dive into the ingredients that made up their distinctive beer. In a world where the luxury of modern brewing techniques and refined ingredients was unimaginable, the ancient Mesopotamians made do with what they had, using simple yet effective ingredients that were locally sourced and readily available. The base ingredient for most Mesopotamian beer was barley, an ancient grain that has been cultivated for thousands of years and remains integral to beer production today. Barley was not only a staple crop but also a key factor in the nutrition and taste of the beer. But barley wasn't the only ingredient used in Mesopotamian beer. Ancient brewers were innovative in how they utilized natural ingredients to enhance the flavor and the quality of their brew. For example, dates, another common and highly prized fruit in ancient Mesopotamia, were often added to the beer to provide a subtle sweetness and a deeper, richer flavor. The process of fermenting beer with dates wasn't just for taste, it also added a bit of sugar, aiding in fermentation and boosting the alcohol content, albeit in a more primitive form compared to modern brewing techniques. In addition to barley and dates, other fruits, such as figs and apples, might have been included to modify the flavor profile of the beer. While these fruits weren't as commonly used as dates, they still played a role in the brewing process, contributing to the complex layers of flavors that would have defined ancient Mesopotamian beer. Imagine sipping this ancient brew, thick, cloudy, and bursting with the earthy flavor of barley, the sweetness of dates, and perhaps a subtle hint of figs. It's a far cry from the crisp lagers we enjoy today, but the ingredients, simple as they were, contributed to a unique and nourishing drink. Historians still debate the exact proportions of ingredients used in Mesopotamian beer and whether the brewing process varied significantly across regions. Some believe that different cities or even households might have had their own variations of the recipe, depending on local crop yields and available resources. Others argue that the basic ingredients, barley, dates, and water, remained largely consistent across the empire. What is clear, however, is that the Mesopotamians were resourceful brewers, using whatever was available to create a drink that served both nutritional and social functions. The method of brewing in Mesopotamia was also quite different from the modern-day process of beer production. The beer was often thicker and more porridge-like, more of a liquid meal than the clear, carbonated beverage we're familiar with today. The fermentation process was simpler, relying on wild yeast and the natural environment to produce alcohol. Beer was not brewed for the sole purpose of intoxication, it was a drink that nourished the body and provided sustenance. Ancient Mesopotamians drank beer not only for pleasure but also as a form of nutrition, particularly for the working class and laborers who needed energy to get through their long days. Beer was an important part of the diet, helping to sustain people and keep them hydrated in a time when drinking water wasn't always safe or available. As you prepare to drift off to sleep tonight, think about the simple ingredients that went into that ancient brew: barley, dates, and the natural magic of fermentation. Picture the thick, sweet liquid in your hands, a product of ingenuity and resourcefulness. While our modern beers have evolved with new techniques and ingredients, the basic concept of beer as a drink of both refreshment and sustenance remains unchanged. Tonight, as you rest, you can appreciate the timeless nature of a beverage that has connected cultures and people for thousands of years, just as the Mesopotamians did in their time. In ancient Mesopotamia, beer wasn't just something to drink during a casual meal or gathering, it had deep religious significance and was integral to many of the rituals that defined Mesopotamian spirituality. In a world where the gods were ever present, and where everything from the rise and fall of empires to the harvest depended on divine favor, beer became a sacred offering. Imagine yourself in a temple or ceremonial space, where priests and priestesses would brew large vats of beer not only for the people but to offer it to the gods themselves. The Mesopotamians believed that beer had a direct connection to the divine, and it was consumed in the hopes of gaining favor, guidance, or blessings. Beer was often used in religious ceremonies as a form of tribute to the gods, a sacred gift from the people to their deities. The goddess Ninkasi, for example, was revered as the patroness of beer and brewing. She was often invoked during the brewing process, and hymns were written in her honor. Some of the earliest texts we have on brewing were actually dedicated to Ninkasi. These hymns not only praised her for her divine role in creating beer but also served as recipes, ensuring that future generations would brew in her name. Beer, in this context, wasn't just a drink, it was a means of communicating with the gods, a way of participating in the divine order. The role of beer in religious rituals extended beyond just the brewing process. Once the beer was made, it was used in festivals, offerings, and sacrifices. Large quantities of beer were offered to the gods in temples and during religious ceremonies, often accompanied by prayers or songs. These offerings were intended to keep the gods pleased, ensuring good harvests, protection from enemies, and prosperity for the community. In fact, beer was often used as an offering in both public and private rituals, with families and leaders using beer to secure blessings for their homes and lands. In the royal courts, beer wasn't just consumed for religious purposes, it was used as a tool to build alliances and strengthen bonds between rulers and the gods. Kings and queens often made offerings of beer to show respect for the gods, ensuring that their reigns were blessed and their empires protected. Beer thus played a role in both the political and religious spheres, with its consumption acting as a form of divine communication and favor. Historians still debate the extent to which beer was seen as a direct communication with the gods. Some scholars argue that the ritual use of beer was central to the way Mesopotamians viewed their relationship with the divine, while others suggest that it was more of a symbolic act, an offering to ensure the favor of the gods but not necessarily a belief in the gods' direct consumption of the offering. Either way, it's clear that beer was far more than just a drink for the Mesopotamians, it was a key part of their religious and cultural life, a beverage that carried profound spiritual meaning. As you settle into your own restful sleep tonight, think of the way beer was used in ancient Mesopotamian rituals. Picture the high priests offering it in the temple, the solemn prayers being said, and the connection between the people and the divine sealed with each sip. Just as the Mesopotamians used beer to build their relationship with the gods, we too engage in our own rituals of connection, whether through spiritual practices, rest, or shared experiences with others. Beer, like the rituals of sleep, is part of an ancient human need to connect with something greater than ourselves. Beyond its religious significance, beer in ancient Mesopotamia played a crucial role in daily social life. Unlike today, where beer might be enjoyed at a pub or social gathering, the ancient Mesopotamians viewed beer as a communal experience. It was shared at meals, used as a sign of hospitality, and even consumed during work breaks. But what made beer so special in the social fabric of Mesopotamia? For the common people, beer wasn't just a casual drink, it was an essential part of their diet, offering nourishment and refreshment after a long day of work. The brewing and consumption of beer were largely communal activities. It wasn't unusual for families or neighbors to gather together, sharing beer as they worked, ate, and relaxed. Beer was often consumed in taverns or large communal spaces, where people could come together after work or during the evening to relax, swap stories, and build relationships. The communal aspect of drinking beer played a significant role in fostering a sense of unity and connection among the people, strengthening social ties and offering a shared moment of enjoyment. This practice wasn't reserved only for the elite, beer was a drink that transcended class lines, with both nobles and commoners alike partaking in its benefits. In Mesopotamian society, beer was considered an essential part of hospitality. When guests arrived, whether for a formal visit or a casual meal, beer was often the first offering extended to them. It was a symbol of welcome, and refusing to partake in a shared drink was considered disrespectful. Imagine yourself as a guest in a Mesopotamian home, being offered a cup of beer as a sign of goodwill and hospitality. The drink itself wasn't just about quenching your thirst, it was about creating bonds, reinforcing friendships, and ensuring that everyone felt included in the social experience. Historians still argue about how beer in Mesopotamia was used socially. Some believe that beer was consumed mainly by the lower classes, while others suggest that it was a drink that permeated all levels of society. Beer wasn't just a drink for the commoners, it was also consumed by the elite, who would sometimes enjoy it in larger feasts or private banquets. The difference, however, was often in the type of beer consumed. The common people likely drank the thicker, more nourishing beer, which was closer to a porridge, while the elite had access to lighter, clearer beers. These differences, while subtle, helped define the social layers of Mesopotamian life. Beer, in Mesopotamian society, was also used as a form of currency. It was common for workers to be paid in beer, especially those who labored on large agricultural projects or for the royal family. This meant that beer played a dual role in the economy, both as a drink for social purposes and as a medium of exchange. In essence, beer was woven into the fabric of daily life, affecting everything from the most intimate family gatherings to large-scale economic systems. As you relax tonight, think of the role beer played in the daily lives of the ancient Mesopotamians. It wasn't just about drinking, it was about connecting with others, fostering community, and sharing a moment of respite after a day's work. Much like the social rituals we observe today, where food and drink bring people together, beer in ancient Mesopotamia was a symbol of unity and a celebration of life's simpler pleasures. So, as you drift off to sleep, think of the warm and comforting thought of shared moments, just like the Mesopotamians found in their communal beer rituals. Now that we've explored the cultural and social role of beer in ancient Mesopotamia, it's time to address one of the most debated topics among historians: how strong was the alcohol content of Mesopotamian beer? The idea of ancient beer often evokes images of strong, hearty brews, but the truth is that beer in Mesopotamia likely had a very different consistency and alcohol content compared to the beverages we enjoy today. Ancient Mesopotamian beer was a far cry from the clear, bubbly lagers and alesh we drink in modern times. Mesopotamian beer was thick, almost porridge-like, due to the unfiltered nature of the brewing process. It was often made with a mix of barley, water, and dates, which gave it a somewhat sweet, dense consistency. The alcohol content, however, is a matter of scholarly debate. Some argue that the beer was relatively low in alcohol, perhaps similar to a modern-day mild beer or a non-alcoholic beverage, while others suggest it was stronger than that, containing a much higher percentage of alcohol, making it a more potent drink. One reason for this uncertainty is that the ancient brewing methods were quite different from the modern techniques we use today. Mesopotamian beer wasn't brewed in the same way as modern beer, which involves controlled fermentation processes with specific yeast strains. Instead, the ancient process likely relied on natural wild yeasts and a much less precise fermentation process. This led to variations in alcohol content depending on the batch, the fermentation time, and the environmental conditions. Without the precise scientific control we have today, it's difficult to determine exactly how much alcohol was in each batch of beer. Historians still argue over the alcohol content of ancient Mesopotamian beer. Some scholars suggest that the beer was intentionally brewed to be relatively low in alcohol, making it a drink that could be consumed throughout the day without causing inebriation. This theory fits with the idea that beer in Mesopotamian society wasn't just for pleasure, it was also a vital part of the diet, providing nourishment and hydration. In this context, the alcohol content may have been kept low to ensure that workers, farmers, and laborers could drink it without becoming intoxicated. Others, however, argue that the beer was stronger, providing a more potent alcoholic experience. They point to evidence that beer was sometimes used as a form of payment for laborers, which suggests that the beer was valued as a source of energy and a tool for social bonding, potentially making it more alcoholic. Another key factor to consider is how beer was consumed in Mesopotamian society. Since the beer was thick and unfiltered, it was often drunk through straws or special drinking vessels, which would have made it difficult to drink large quantities quickly. This slower consumption might have prevented people from getting too drunk too quickly, even if the beer had a higher alcohol content. The ancient drinking methods could have also helped to control the effects of alcohol, allowing people to enjoy the beverage while still maintaining composure. As you prepare for rest tonight, think about the ancient process of brewing beer. The Mesopotamians crafted their beer with simple, natural ingredients, without the modern tools and techniques we use today. Their beer wasn't just about relaxation or socializing, it was a vital part of their sustenance, providing nourishment, hydration, and community. Whether strong or mild, thick or light, Mesopotamian beer was an essential part of life that brought people together, both in the fields and in the temples. Just like their beer, our own rituals, whether they involve a drink or a shared meal, serve to connect us with others and to rejuvenate us after a long day. As we delve deeper into the brewing practices of ancient Mesopotamia, it's time to look at the process itself, how the Mesopotamians went from raw grain to their beloved beer. While modern beer brewing might seem like an industrial process, with precise ingredients and machines that control every step, the ancient Mesopotamians relied on a much simpler but equally creative approach to brewing. In their world, beer was brewed using basic ingredients, intuition, and craftsmanship. Imagine yourself in an ancient Mesopotamian brewery, where the air is thick with the scent of barley and hops, and large clay vessels are bubbling with the mixture that will eventually become one of the earliest beers in history. The first step in the Mesopotamian brewing process was to soak barley in water, allowing it to germinate. This process, known as malting, is still used in modern brewing to convert the starches in grains into fermentable sugars. After the barley sprouted, it was roasted to halt the germination process, effectively killing the sprout and locking in the sugars needed for fermentation. The roasted barley would then be ground into a coarse mash, ready for the next stage of brewing. The next step was the brewing itself. In ancient Mesopotamian brewing, water would be added to the barley mash, and then the mixture would be left to ferment. Since the Mesopotamians didn't have modern yeast strains, they relied on wild yeasts that naturally occurred in the air, the environment, and on the surfaces of brewing equipment. The natural fermentation process might have taken longer than the controlled fermentation we see in modern brewing, but it still resulted in a rudimentary form of alcohol. At this point, the brew would have been quite thick and porridge-like, a characteristic that distinguishes Mesopotamian beer from today's lighter, clearer varieties. Once the fermentation process was complete, the resulting beer would be strained through a cloth or other filtration methods to remove the solid particles and make it drinkable. The resulting liquid was often cloudy and thick, making it more of a food than a drink. This beer was also low in alcohol compared to modern brews, probably around 3 to 4% alcohol content, making it a nutritious and hydrating beverage rather than a strong, intoxicating drink. Historians still debate how much the brewing process varied across Mesopotamian cities and regions. Some scholars suggest that there were specific variations in brewing techniques depending on local resources or the presence of certain natural ingredients. Other historians believe that the process was relatively standardized, with brewers following similar methods across the region. Either way, the brewing of beer in ancient Mesopotamia was a highly skilled craft, and it was taken seriously. Brewers were highly regarded for their expertise, and beer was considered a vital part of both daily life and religious ceremonies. As you settle in for sleep tonight, consider the artistry involved in creating that ancient brew. The Mesopotamians didn't just create beer to quench their thirst, they carefully cultivated their ingredients and used time-honored techniques to craft a beverage that nourished both body and spirit. Just like the brewers of ancient Mesopotamia, we too engage in creative processes, whether in work, art, or everyday life, taking time to hone our craft and make something meaningful. Sleep, too, is a product of our own processes, our bodies resting, recharging, and preparing for the day ahead. Tonight, as you rest, think of the ancient brewers and their craft, and how the timeless practice of making something nourishing and satisfying has endured through the ages. As we move through the fascinating history of beer in ancient Mesopotamia, it's time to turn our attention to how beer was consumed by the elite, particularly in the royal courts. While beer was an essential part of everyday life for the general population, it also played a significant role in the lavish banquets and rituals of the aristocracy and royalty. Imagine yourself in the grand halls of a royal palace, where sumptuous feasts are held, and beer is served alongside wine, fine foods, and delicate treats. In these elite settings, beer wasn't just a drink, it was a symbol of wealth, status, and divine favor. It was consumed by kings, queens, priests, and nobility, and it played an important role in both social gatherings and religious ceremonies. For the ruling class, beer wasn't just about nutrition or refreshment, it was also about indulgence. The beer enjoyed by royalty was often brewed to a different standard than that of the common people, with a finer texture, clearer consistency, and often more refined flavors. Beer in the royal court was part of an extravagant feast, enjoyed alongside elaborate dishes of meat, fruits, and desserts. The banquets held in royal courts were grand affairs, and beer was consumed not just for pleasure but as part of the ceremonial process, enhancing the prestige and status of the rulers who served it. In royal Mesopotamian courts, beer was often consumed as part of religious ceremonies and offerings. As we discussed earlier, beer was closely tied to the gods in Mesopotamian society, and it was used as a sacred offering during rituals. When rulers or priests in the royal courts offered beer to the gods, they were seeking divine favor, protection, and blessings for their reigns. Beer, in this context, was viewed as a gift to the gods, a ritualistic element that ensured the prosperity and success of the kingdom. Just as the common people turned to beer for socializing and nourishment, the elite used beer to ensure their reign was blessed and their kingdom would flourish. In the royal courts, the elite also used beer as a tool for diplomacy and alliance building. Kings and queens would offer lavish feasts to foreign dignitaries, using beer as a means of hospitality and goodwill. In these diplomatic settings, beer was consumed not just as a drink, but as a symbol of friendship, peace, and alliance. The offering of beer was an expression of generosity, and partaking in the beer together was a shared bond, a way to establish mutual trust and cooperation. These feasts were not only about celebrating victories or securing alliances but also about reinforcing the ruler's power and prestige within the larger political landscape. Historians debate how much the use of beer in royal courts differed from its consumption in the general population. Was the beer of the elite truly a more refined version of the common drink, or was it more about the social and political context in which it was consumed? Some argue that beer in the royal court was brewed to a higher standard, with added ingredients or processes that made it distinct. Others suggest that beer, whether consumed by the elite or the common people, remained fundamentally the same, with the difference lying in the rituals and context of consumption. Regardless of the debate, it's clear that beer played a significant role in the royal courts, from its use in religious ceremonies to its role in diplomacy and social bonding. As you reflect on the role of beer in the royal courts of Mesopotamia, think of the lavish banquets and the ceremonial offerings to the gods. Picture yourself sitting at one of those grand tables, the rich taste of beer complementing the decadent feast before you. Just as beer played a part in bringing people together in the courts of the kings, we too find that food and drink are powerful symbols of connection, whether in royal palaces or around our own tables. Tonight, as you settle into sleep, think of the timeless traditions of hospitality and celebration, where food and drink have always been at the center of human connection. As we continue our journey into the fascinating world of ancient Mesopotamian beer, it's important to consider its role not just in social and religious life, but also in health. Today, we think of beer as an indulgence, often associated with relaxation and socializing, but for the ancient Mesopotamians, beer was also viewed as a nutritious and healthful beverage. In a society where clean drinking water wasn't always easily accessible or safe, beer offered a reliable and often safer alternative. It was a drink that could hydrate, nourish, and even provide medicinal benefits. Imagine yourself as a laborer or merchant in ancient Mesopotamia, relying on beer not just for enjoyment but as a part of your daily diet, a drink that would help you power through a hard day's work. The beer brewed by the Mesopotamians was far different from the clear, carbonated varieties we're familiar with today. It was thicker, often more like a gruel or porridge than a drink, and it was packed with nutrients that made it more akin to a liquid meal. The barley, dates, and sometimes other fruits or grains added to the brew made it a rich source of carbohydrates and sugars. For the working classes, particularly laborers or soldiers, beer was a vital source of sustenance. It wasn't just about drinking, it was about providing necessary calories and nutrients to keep the body going. The calories in beer provided a quick and accessible form of energy, especially for those who worked long hours in the fields or in the construction of temples, palaces, and city walls. In addition to its nutritional value, beer also had health benefits. Ancient texts suggest that beer was often used as a medicinal remedy, both to treat illnesses and to promote overall well-being. Beer's role in health wasn't just about providing hydration, it was believed to help in digestion and improve appetite, aiding in the proper function of the body's internal systems. The Mesopotamians also used beer as a mild medicinal tonic, believed to alleviate stress, ease fatigue, and even promote a sense of relaxation. In the absence of modern medicines, beer served as a versatile remedy, used to treat various ailments or to improve general health. Historians still debate the extent to which beer was used as a medicinal remedy in ancient Mesopotamia. Some argue that it was primarily viewed as a form of nourishment and a way to help people manage their daily energy needs, while others suggest that the beer had more therapeutic properties than we give it credit for. Research into ancient brewing practices shows that the fermentation process creates compounds that may have had a beneficial impact on health, including probiotics that support gut health and immunity. While modern science has yet to confirm the full extent of beer's medicinal properties, it's clear that beer played an important role in Mesopotamian health practices, offering both physical nourishment and a form of self-care. The health benefits of beer also extended beyond just the physical body. In a society that was deeply connected to the gods and divine favor, beer was seen as a gift from the gods. Drinking beer wasn't just a physical act, it was also a way of maintaining spiritual balance. The Mesopotamians believed that by offering beer to the gods, they were maintaining harmony between the divine and mortal worlds. This connection between beer, health, and the gods served to reinforce the significance of the drink in everyday life. It wasn't just something to consume, it was a way to keep the body strong, the mind at ease, and the connection with the divine intact. As you settle into sleep tonight, think about the role that beer played in the health and daily lives of the ancient Mesopotamians. They didn't just drink beer for pleasure, it was an essential part of their diet and wellness routines. Much like how we turn to modern drinks or foods for energy, comfort, or relaxation, the Mesopotamians used their beer to nourish their bodies, ease their minds, and maintain their health. Tonight, as you rest, remember that just as the Mesopotamians understood the importance of balance and nourishment, we too can embrace the importance of rest, relaxation, and taking care of our own health, both physically and mentally. In ancient Mesopotamia, beer was not reserved for the elite or for special occasions, it was a drink that permeated every level of society, especially for the common people. For laborers, farmers, and artisans, beer was an essential part of daily life, providing not only refreshment but also sustenance. In a world where water wasn't always safe to drink, beer was a reliable source of hydration and energy. Imagine yourself as a Mesopotamian farmer, working long hours under the scorching sun. After a hard day in the fields, there would be no better way to relax and recharge than by sharing a cool mug of beer with your fellow workers. Beer wasn't just a drink for the elite feasts in royal courts or religious ceremonies, it was the drink of choice for everyday people. The commoners drank beer in abundance, using it to accompany their meals and to ease the physical toll of hard labor. As we mentioned earlier, the beer was thick and porridge-like, packed with calories that provided necessary nourishment. It was a quick and effective way to rehydrate and refuel after hours of physical work. Beer, along with bread, was a staple of the Mesopotamian diet. Together, they formed the foundation of the commoners' nutrition, offering essential carbohydrates, sugars, and energy. In many ways, beer played a role similar to bread in Mesopotamian society, with both serving as an important daily staple. However, unlike bread, which was often baked at home or in communal ovens, beer required a more specialized process to make. Brewing beer required specific knowledge and skill, and while most families brewed their own beer, larger breweries in Mesopotamian cities catered to the demands of the population. Beer was sold in taverns or even in small local shops, where people could purchase it at a reasonable price. These taverns weren't just places to grab a drink, they were community hubs where people gathered to relax, gossip, share news, and socialize. Historians still debate the extent to which the brewing process was done by individuals versus by larger, organized breweries. Some scholars argue that the brewing of beer was a family affair, with people brewing in their homes as part of their daily life. Others suggest that there were larger, centralized brewing operations, especially in the cities, where beer was brewed on a larger scale for public consumption. Regardless of the specific brewing process, one thing is clear: beer was an integral part of the daily routine for people of all social classes. It was a drink that helped bind communities together, offering not only nourishment but also the opportunity to relax and connect with others. In fact, the role of beer in daily life went beyond just consumption, it also had economic significance. Beer was used as payment for labor, particularly for the workers who labored on the king's projects, such as the construction of temples, palaces, and city walls. Workers were often paid in a combination of food, beer, and wages, with beer being a form of compensation that was both nutritious and comforting. The fact that beer was used as currency highlights its essential role in the economy and daily life of ancient Mesopotamia. It wasn't just a drink, it was a currency of sorts, a vital part of the labor system that helped keep society functioning. As you settle in tonight and reflect on the role of beer in the daily life of commoners in ancient Mesopotamia, think about how this drink, simple as it was, helped shape their daily routines and their sense of community. Beer was more than just a beverage, it was a cornerstone of their social interactions, a vital part of their diet, and even a currency that kept their world in motion. In today's world, we might have more variety in our drink choices, but the spirit of connection and sustenance that the Mesopotamians found in their beer lives on. Whether it's sharing a drink with friends or sitting down to a nourishing meal, we too experience the social and restorative power that beer once provided to the people of ancient Mesopotamia. As we near the end of our exploration into the fascinating world of Mesopotamian beer, it's important to understand how the decline of Mesopotamian cities and the rise of new empires impacted the brewing traditions and the role of beer in society. The ancient cities of Mesopotamia, like Ur, Babylon, and Nineveh, were once thriving centers of culture, commerce, and innovation. However, as empires rose and fell, and as political and military landscapes shifted, the complex social and economic systems that supported beer brewing also began to erode. With the fall of these once great cities and the eventual decline of Mesopotamian power, many of the traditional practices, including brewing beer, faded from prominence. The fall of the Babylonian Empire in the 6th century BCE marked one of the key turning points for the Mesopotamian beer tradition. As the region was absorbed into the Persian Empire and later, the Alexander the Great's Hellenistic influence took hold, Mesopotamian customs began to give way to new practices. These empires brought with them their own styles of governance, their own economic systems, and importantly, their own approaches to food and drink. The intricate, community-based brewing practices that had been integral to the everyday lives of Mesopotamians were gradually replaced by more centralized systems. Larger, state-controlled production methods became the norm, and the deeply rooted, home-brewed traditions of the Mesopotamian people slowly faded into the background. Historians still debate the extent to which beer brewing continued after the fall of the major Mesopotamian cities. Some argue that beer brewing persisted in smaller pockets of society, especially in rural areas where traditional methods were still upheld. Others suggest that, as the region became more integrated into larger empires, beer brewing became a more industrialized and less personal process, potentially leading to a loss of the deep cultural connection that Mesopotamians once had to their beer. Despite the challenges and the passing of the great empires of Mesopotamia, beer remained an essential beverage in the broader ancient world, carried on by the Persians, Greeks, and eventually the Romans. The growing influence of the Greek and Roman empires also played a role in the decline of Mesopotamian beer brewing. These empires brought with them new methods of alcohol production, including the widespread adoption of wine, which was viewed as a more refined and prestigious drink than beer. As wine became the drink of choice for the elite, beer began to be relegated more to the working classes and rural areas. The once celebrated Mesopotamian brewing traditions, tied so deeply to religious and communal life, were overshadowed by the emerging practices of new civilizations. Even in the centuries following the fall of Mesopotamia, beer brewing never fully disappeared. The techniques and recipes for brewing beer were passed down through the generations, and many elements of Mesopotamian beer brewing influenced later cultures, including the Egyptians, Greeks, and Romans. In fact, the early Romans even developed their own form of brewing, drawing on practices from the East, and the concept of beer as both a beverage and a ritualistic drink carried over. Though Mesopotamian beer brewing may have declined in prominence, its influence on future cultures, and on the modern beer we drink today, is undeniable. As you prepare for rest tonight, think about the slow fading of the Mesopotamian beer tradition. While the grand cities of Mesopotamia may have crumbled, the impact of their brewing practices rippled through history, influencing the beverage culture of future empires. Just as the ancient world adapted and evolved, so too do our own traditions and practices change with time. Even though the Mesopotamians no longer brew their unique beer, their innovation in the art of fermentation continues to influence the way we enjoy beer today. So, as you settle in for your peaceful rest, reflect on how traditions, whether from the past or present, live on in different forms, passing from one culture to the next, shaping the world in ways we might not even realize. Despite the decline of the great Mesopotamian cities and the shift toward new forms of governance and economic systems, the legacy of Mesopotamian beer brewing endures in fascinating ways. The practices that the Mesopotamians perfected thousands of years ago, the brewing of thick, hearty beer, using barley, dates, and wild fermentation, have influenced cultures across the world and continue to resonate today. In fact, elements of Mesopotamian brewing have survived into modern times, whether through the brewing methods we use today or in the way beer continues to serve as a symbol of community, celebration, and even spirituality. When we think of beer today, we often imagine modern breweries with their controlled fermentation, elaborate equipment, and clear, carbonated beverages. But, at its core, beer remains a drink with ancient roots. The fermentation process used by the Mesopotamians was a key stepping stone for the development of the brewing techniques we use today. While modern brewing is far more advanced, utilizing cultivated yeast and precise brewing techniques, the idea of brewing beer as both a nourishment and a social drink was first established by the people of Mesopotamia. Their knowledge of how to transform grain into beer laid the foundation for everything that came after. The social and ritualistic aspects of beer brewing also had a lasting impact. Much like the Mesopotamians, modern beer drinkers gather in communal spaces, whether at a pub, brewery, or festival, creating bonds through shared experiences over a drink. Beer remains, as it was for the ancient Mesopotamians, a symbol of connection, whether among friends, family, or even strangers. The social function of beer transcends time and culture, and just as the Mesopotamians used beer to bond, share news, and even make political alliances, we continue to do so today. Whether in a local tavern, a family gathering, or an international celebration, beer remains a vehicle for social connection. Moreover, Mesopotamian beer brewing wasn't only about community, it was also an integral part of religious and spiritual life. Just as the gods in Mesopotamian culture were offered beer during ceremonies, modern breweries and breweries worldwide often pay homage to the past with rituals of their own. Modern brewing techniques are steeped in reverence for the craft, with some beer makers still using old recipes, while others honor the legacy of traditional brewing with a spiritual connection to the art. The reverence for beer is more than just a drink, something that can bring people together and connect them to a greater purpose, continues in today's brewing culture. Historians continue to explore the full extent of Mesopotamian brewing's legacy. Some argue that the practices of the ancient Mesopotamians had a direct influence on later civilizations, particularly the Egyptians, who brewed beer in similar ways. Others suggest that beer brewing simply evolved independently in different cultures, but they all agree that the methods and traditions developed by the Mesopotamians served as a foundation for the art of brewing. Whether or not Mesopotamian beer influenced other cultures directly, it's clear that its social, cultural, and medicinal impact cannot be overstated. Beer became so much more than just a drink, it was a symbol of civilization, a connection to the divine, and a way to bond as a community. As you prepare for rest tonight, think about how the ancient Mesopotamians' knowledge of brewing beer not only influenced their culture but has continued to ripple through history, affecting everything from social gatherings to religious rituals. While their cities and empires may have crumbled, their craft, their knowledge of fermentation and their appreciation of beer as both nourishment and connection, has persisted. The next time you share a drink with friends or enjoy a peaceful moment of relaxation with a cold beer, you can think of the ancient Mesopotamians, whose innovative practices laid the foundation for the rich, diverse beer culture we enjoy today. The influence of ancient Mesopotamian beer brewing practices is still alive and well today, even though the methods may have evolved over time. The brewing of beer, once a sacred craft in the heart of ancient Mesopotamia, has become a global industry that connects people across cultures and continents. Whether it's the rise of craft breweries or the continuing appreciation for beer as a cultural touchstone, modern beer culture owes a debt to the Mesopotamians, who first transformed grain into a drink that nourished both body and spirit. Imagine yourself in a modern craft brewery, where ancient techniques meet contemporary innovation. You're sipping on a beer brewed with care, using ingredients that have been refined over thousands of years, a testament to the enduring legacy of those early Mesopotamian brewers. Today's beer brewers still draw inspiration from ancient techniques. The process of fermenting barley into beer, while more controlled and scientifically advanced than ever before, remains rooted in the same principles that the Mesopotamians used. Just as the Mesopotamians relied on wild yeast for fermentation, today's brewers continue to experiment with different yeast strains to create unique flavors and textures. The process is refined, of course, with advanced brewing equipment and precise temperature control, but at its core, it's the same concept, turning grains into a beverage that can be enjoyed socially, sustainably, and with an appreciation for craftsmanship. The brewing culture that emerged from ancient Mesopotamia has found its way into modern times through the rise of craft breweries. These small, independent breweries have become the modern-day descendants of the ancient Mesopotamian beer makers, who took pride in creating something uniquely their own. Just as ancient Mesopotamians brewed beer for communal enjoyment, today's craft brewers create beers for local communities, fostering a sense of connection through shared experiences. The communal aspects of drinking beer have not only endured but have grown in significance, as craft breweries often emphasize community engagement, local sourcing, and sustainability. The social nature of beer, which was integral to Mesopotamian culture, continues to thrive in these modern settings. The cultural significance of beer remains as strong as ever. From the Mesopotamians using beer in religious rituals to modern-day festivals like Oktoberfest, beer has always had a symbolic place in human culture. Today, beer is still used in celebrations, rites of passage, and social gatherings. Just as the Mesopotamians used beer to foster community and ensure divine favor, we use beer to connect with friends, family, and even strangers. Beer continues to be a drink of choice for socialization, relaxation, and communal bonding. It's fascinating to think how this humble beverage, brewed with barley and water, has transcended cultures and centuries, becoming a symbol of both simplicity and social cohesion. Historians still argue over how much influence Mesopotamian brewing had on later cultures, particularly those of the Greeks, Romans, and Egyptians. Some suggest that Mesopotamia's innovations in brewing directly influenced the beer cultures of these subsequent civilizations. Others believe that the brewing traditions evolved independently in different regions. However, what is clear is that the principles of brewing that were established in Mesopotamia have continued to resonate throughout history, finding their way into the practices of ancient empires and modern breweries alike. The legacy of Mesopotamian beer brewing is, quite literally, alive and well today. As you settle into your own rest tonight, think about the enduring legacy of Mesopotamian beer brewing. Thousands of years ago, in the heart of ancient cities like Ur and Babylon, people were crafting beer, not just as a drink, but as a form of nourishment, a cultural tool, and a link between the human and divine. Today, we continue to brew and enjoy beer, celebrating it for the same reasons: to nourish, to relax, and to connect with others. From the ancient brewing vats to today's craft breweries, beer has endured as a symbol of community, creativity, and a shared human experience that transcends time and place. As we come to the end of our journey through the rich history of Mesopotamian beer brewing, it's a good moment to reflect on the profound impact that this ancient craft has had on human culture and society. The Mesopotamians didn't just brew beer for simple enjoyment, they infused it with meaning, both spiritually and socially. Beer was a part of their daily lives, their rituals, and their communal gatherings. What started as a means of nourishment and relaxation in one of the world's earliest civilizations has now grown into a global tradition that spans continents and cultures. From the ancient brewing methods that used barley, dates, and wild fermentation, to the rise of modern breweries using controlled methods and precise techniques, beer has come a long way. But even with all the advances in brewing, the essence of what makes beer special remains the same: it's a drink that brings people together, that creates bonds, and that provides both refreshment and relaxation. The Mesopotamians understood this deeply, and their legacy has lived on through the centuries. Whether it's in the form of a local craft beer brewed with care or a mass-produced lager enjoyed at a gathering, beer continues to be a social drink that brings people together, just as it did in the ancient world. The connection between beer and social life has also been passed down through generations. Just as the Mesopotamians gathered at their communal drinking spaces, modern societies still find that beer is a perfect companion for socializing, whether at a bar, a backyard barbecue, or an international festival. The shared enjoyment of beer fosters conversations, celebrations, and connections between people. This bond, forged through the shared experience of beer, transcends time and geography, from the ancient taverns of Mesopotamia to the bustling beer gardens of today. At the same time, beer has always been a drink of ritual and meaning. Just as the Mesopotamians offered beer to the gods in religious ceremonies, modern brewers often see the creation of beer as a sacred process, filled with respect for ingredients, tradition, and craftsmanship. The creative and spiritual energy that went into brewing ancient beer is still alive today in the passionate brewers who view their craft as an art form. Whether it's the intricate balance of flavors in a craft beer or the history behind a classic brew, beer retains its special place in human culture. So, as you settle into your own rest tonight, think about the long journey of beer through history. From the first brews crafted by the Mesopotamians to the bottles we open today, beer has been a drink of sustenance, social connection, and spiritual significance. Just like the ancient brewers, we too find joy and relaxation in the simple act of sharing a drink, relaxing with friends, and taking a moment to connect with the world around us. Tonight, as you prepare for a peaceful sleep, think about the timeless rituals that help us unwind and recharge, just as the Mesopotamians did so many centuries ago.